I think we are live
There we
finally.
go.
All right.
Sorry for the 37 of you in the room who are waiting. We learn every time. For some reason, when I clicked start the show live, it took 3 minutes to warm up. You will see my guest for the first time right on the screen. In the middle is my friend Eric Felten. Eric is a Washington, D.C. journalist. He wrote the How's Your Drink column in the Wall Street Journal for many years. And if you're a journal subscriber, you may remember that. So he's an expert on cocktails and all things you drink, as is my guest who's on the right side of your screen, Anthony Dias-Blue, also known as Andy. Andy Blue was Bon Appetit's wine and spirits editor for about 20 years, so his credentials are in order. And he now runs his own website, his own business. He runs some of the largest wine and spirits tasting competitions in the country, including the San Francisco wine competition and the spirits competition in San Francisco as well. And so normally, as you know, I start with a bottle of wine, but I wanted to start with Eric because Eric wrote a piece this week that just came out today in DC for the DC Examiner. What's the title of it, Eric?
Drinking on the cheap in the age of coronavirus, something like that is the headline.
So you called all kinds of experts on vodkas, wines, spirits, and said, okay, what's the best but the cheapest drink in that category you can buy? Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, what's been going on, of course, is that people have been staying home and drinking more. I mean, the stats are rather dramatic on how much more people have been drinking. And at the same time, everybody's in a sort of economic anxiety period. And so I think it's a good time to say that you don't have to spend a whole lot of money to drink well, and that there are some real bargains to be had. And we talked about what the best of a number of different categories of drink are if you're not looking for the top dollar, but really the best value.
All right, you asked me to do white wine. Of course, I called Andy for advice, and he suggested an Albarino, which is a kind of grape that's grown in the very, very northern parts of Portugal. And I have the bottle here. It's called Nortico, an Albarino.
Yes, with a lovely Portuguese style label with that those
blue
tiles that are on all the buildings in Portugal.
Exactly.
Yeah, actually, the most of the production of Albarino is in the Rias Baixas, I don't pronounce it right, area of Spain, which is that little area of Spain which is just north of Portugal on the ocean.
Yeah, and they actually spell it differently when it's in Portuguese, Alvarinho, with a V rather than a B.
You're right. It is an Albarino. I didn't notice that. Yeah, so it's Albarino in Spain and Alvarino in Portugal. This cost me, I believe, about $12 or $13 this bottle here in St. Paul, in Minneapolis, at a good wine store that I went to. Take something like Scotch. What did you find for Scotch, Eric?
Well, you're not going to be able to get very far on a small budget if you're drinking single malts. And so part of what I was looking at is, what it's a good opportunity to explore what blends are worth having on your shelf. And so, for example, for a long time, I've liked Johnnie Walker Black, but I just don't understand Johnnie Walker Red at all as an entry whiskey to the brand. It's so bad that
really?
Oh yeah, and it's sort of like thinking you're going to sell somebody a Cadillac by first having them try a Chevrolet, and that's going to make them enthusiastic about moving up through the brand offerings. Johnnie Walker Black is not cheap, though. The cheap version is the red, and it's just it's like brushing your teeth with some bad toothpaste. I don't know. I just have never liked it. A Cutty Sark, thin, bland, but to my taste, the sort of best of the traditional blends that you're going to find out there is Famous Grouse, which has just a lovely balance of some peaty whiskeys in the blend to give it a little body and flavor. And if you want to spend just a little bit more, there's the black grouse, which is even more peaty, and that's just excellent. There's one single malt that is kind of priced in the blend range, and that's a malt called Glen Moray, and it's a Speyside malt. And the version of that is aged in sherry casks, you can just think of it as a bargain Macallan. If you like Macallan, but you don't want to spend what it costs for a bottle of Macallan 12, give Glen Moray a try, and you won't be too far disappointed.
You have any thoughts on that?
This right
now. Ooh, lovely.
Yeah, but that's not cheap, Andy. We're talking cheap stuff. What does that cost, Andy?
Not cheap. Not cheap.
Not cheap.
Let me just answer a quick question. Leslie, please wanted to know the name of the Albarino wine again. First of all, apparently in Spain it's Albarino, and in Portugal I noticed it's, as Eric pointed out, it's Alvarino with a V instead of a B. This is called Nordica, is the name of the wine, name of the vineyard, excuse me, or the producer. Nordica. Very inexpensive and really, really bright and very, very refreshing. It'll be lovely for the summer, for just about drinking any time. What did you get for a red wine, Eric?
Well, I talked to Karen McNeil, who's of course the author of the Wine Bible, and a lovely person whose tastes I trust, and she recommended the I don't know how to pronounce it. Is it Cune? Cune, the sort of large producer. Andy, you probably know how to.
Yeah, they're a Spanish producer, and they are the biggest operation in Spain, and it's pronounced Cune, but it's actually I don't know. It's kind of confusing, but because it's the letters of the name of their full name. But
right,
anyway.
It's like an acronym with all capital letters.
Exactly.
It's C-U-N-E though? C-U-N-E?
C-U-N-E.
Okay.
And she recommended the Rioja Crianza, which is a 2-year young red wine. And the 2016 vintage she recommended, and is kind of widely recommended as a particularly good year. And that's a wine about $15.
Good. What do you think?
There's also another brand, Marqués de Cáceres, which is they actually own chateaus in Bordeaux as well. Their entry level wine is excellent.
Where is it? Is it Spanish as well or French?
It's Spanish. It's Rioja.
Can you say the name again?
Marqués de Cáceres, or Caceres, or however you want to pronounce it, but
all right. I should tell our viewers that Eric, you just your book, How's Your Drink, was just named one of the must-reads for 20-year-olds or something, or anybody who's 20.
The nice people at BuzzFeed put it on their list of 65 books that everyone should read in their 20s. So I'm right after The Elements of Style, or actually right before The Elements of Style, showing that it's more important to learn to drink than it is to learn how to think. So
exactly.
Absolutely.
I know you, and I couldn't agree more. Well, Eric, how can someone find this article in which you list all these categories and the best tasting at a good price of each?
They can go to WashingtonExaminer.com and look for my name, Felten. It's up on the site, and if they have trouble finding it, they can just Google my name and DC or Washington Examiner and cheap booze, which is none of this is really cheap booze. It's good stuff.
I want to spell your name for Eric, E-R-I-C, and Felten, F-E-L-T-E-N. You can also go to ericfelten.com for more information on his books that Eric has written. Eric, I'm going to say goodbye to you. Did I interrupt you?
Oh, no, I was just going to throw in one last pitch for what is my favorite, my two favorite bargain spirits, which is Evan Williams Bourbon, which is extremely good and extremely inexpensive. They've gotten stuck in a bargain brand basement, and it is no reflection on the quality of the bourbon at all. And then the other is Boodle's gin, which is really traditional English London dry gin, inexpensive, and makes a fantastic martini. Very junipery, very good.
Great.
Are you agreeing with Boodles and Andy?
Yes, absolutely. He's right on.
Good.
Knows what he's talking about.
Eric, Eric, thank you so much for joining us.
It was great being on with you both. Thanks so much, Rudy.
Take care. EricFelten.com. You can see his name on the screen there. And by the way, Danielle writes that it's the second wine, red wine that Andy suggested is Marquez, and it's spelled Caceres.
Right.
Danielle's right on top of it.
Right.
Thank you very, very much. Cacerus. Thank you, Danielle. Thank you, Eric. I'll talk to you.
Thanks.
See you later.
Bye.
We leave Eric home in Washington, and I just wanted to spend a couple more minutes with Andy and talk about. I will tell you, I have traveled the world courtesy of, well, not courtesy of Andy, but with Andy, and tasted wine in places I would never know about or have access to courtesy of him. New Zealand, among other, certainly Napa and Sonoma, and New Zealand, Hungary. It's a hell of a trip. Long time ago to Hungary. Argentina, exactly.
Right.
And what I've learned traveling with Andy and on my own since some of those trips is that all wineries are not alike. As Americans, we're used to being able to go to Oregon or Wisconsin, for that matter, or Minnesota, certainly California, drive in, and often if it's a major winery, they've got a gift shop and they're selling you key rings with their names on it and aprons with their logos on it and butter, who knows what. But in some countries, like in the region of Burgundy in France, wineries don't want to see you. You go knock on the door, they go, we're busy, we're farmers, go by. Where are some other countries that are as friendly as America for tourists who are travelers who just drop in and want to go from winery to winery?
Germany is good. There's some really wonderful, I particularly like the Mosel area because it's so beautiful. And they are, I've found them to be very welcoming and very friendly. Let's see, where else?
New Zealand was certainly.
No, New Zealand was amazing. And I wish I've only been there a couple of times, and I wish I could go back a lot. Rudy and I went to the opening of the Craggy Range, which was just an unbelievable. It's owned by Americans actually, and it's one of the best wineries in New Zealand. It's in the Hawke's Bay area, and we went to the opening, and I think there were 5,000 people there or something like that, and it was black tie.
I sat next to Sir Edmund Hillary.
Yeah, Edmund Hillary and Dame Kiri, I cannot pronounce her name. Anyway, she sang, and I mean, it was quite an event. And those are fabulous wines, Craggy Range.
And everybody's happy to see you everywhere in New Zealand. There's no problem anytime. They're just it's a country with like no problem. What me worry?
No problem. And 50 million sheep.
That's true. Let's see now. Argentina. We went to the Mendoza region. We also went to Patagonia, but in Mendoza, right in the downtown center, they had a wine welcoming store, and they would help make arrangements for you to go to wineries.
Right, and when you go down there, almost every winery has a restaurant, and it's the food is good. So, Argentina is great, and let me see where else. Well, I went to Slovenia, and I had a really great time there, but that's a little bit off the beaten track.
There's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. But by the way, let me tell our viewers that sometimes when we talk about wine like this, people say, "Oh, I thought this was a travel webcast." In about 10 minutes, our friend Patrick Smith will be joining us. He's a pilot for a major U.S. airline. He doesn't want me to reveal the name of that airline, but it's a big one. And he writes a very, very approachable and lively blog, Ask the Pilot. He's written a book called Cockpit Confidential, and he really, really is a smart guy about airlines, and obviously with what's coming up, or we don't know what's coming up, I think he'll be a help. So let me return to our conversation. You welcome people just to drive up and taste some wine, Andy? They do? Does Slovenia welcome visitors, through the door?
Yes, yeah, definitely. Slovenia is a beautiful country, and the people are very friendly, and they speak English. And what can I tell you? I think we've lost our video here.
I know you had one before the show, before we went live. I know you were having sometimes your internet dropped out a little, but we still see a picture of you, and we can still hear you, Andy. In Bordeaux seems a little more open than Burgundy in France. Bordeaux, I mean, not some of the big names like Chateau Margaux. You have to have an appointment and all that.
Yeah, that's true. It's and the Bordeaux road, particularly up through the Pauillac and Saint Estèphe area, is loaded with chateaus, and if you can't get into one, you get into the other. It's
right. Linda, one of our viewers, Linda, recommends South Africa, and I think you and I would both second that emotion.
Yes,
and they love showing around
that whole Franschhoek area. They're delightful. The beautiful architecture and beautiful place, and the people are just lovely, really. And it's right outside of Cape Town. So I mean, if you go to South Africa, you fly into Cape Town, and it's 45 minutes north of Cape Town, just like Napa is 45 minutes north of San Francisco. But it's really, really lovely, and probably one of the most beautiful wine areas I've ever been in.
And the wines are well priced. Michael has a question, and I bet you get this a lot, Andy. Yeah. Michael says, I love wine, but sadly I get the red wine tannin headache after only one glass of wine. Can you recommend a way to avoid that headache?
And they don't really know what causes that. Some people think it's histamine. Some people think it's, it could be anything. I don't know what that is, but I think the secret is if you want to drink red wine, you have to drink really quality red wine rather than cheap stuff, and it's probably less likely to give you a headache. At least that's what I've heard.
Is drinking water or taking with food of any help? I mean, I know sometimes if I drink red wine with like beef, big meat, which of course goes with red wine, I can sometimes, I'll get a headache the next morning. Sometimes I don't. You're right. I can't predict it.
No, it's very hard to. It's usually any kind of a hangover comes from congeners, which are the impurities, so that it's better to drink pure, better small production stuff rather than big stuff, I think. I mean, I don't know. I'm not an expert on that.
My goodness, my friend Cynthia Blanton, with whom I went to high school and had a huge crush on the entire time, says drinking some milk afterwards seems to help. Well, thank you, Cindy.
Really?
Yeah. We weren't old when I knew Cindy. I don't know how she knows that.
Alka-Seltzer.
Or Alka-Seltzer, exactly. Oh, the bat phone. Maybe somebody's got a suggestion for you. Okay, one more country, and we'll let you go. We went to Hungary. If you recall.
Yes, we did. I have a picture of us in Hungary on my wall.
Long time ago, we went there to taste some things that have putanayas or whatever they're called. What's that wine called there? The sweet wine?
Tokai.
Tokai, of course. Tokai.
J. Tokai. Whatever it is. It's a sweet wine, and it's fabulous. Now I'm told that we went a long time ago. That things have changed. That actually the bathroom is in the room this time. And
can I tell the story? We flew with a friend of ours who was an executive at American Airlines, and we stayed in a motel more than a hotel. And Andy and I both had rooms with private baths, but Tim, the guy from American Airlines, had to go down the hall. And the next morning he was griping about it. And I'll never forget your line, Andy. Your comeback was, Tim, I fly your American Airlines planes. I got to walk down the damn whole plane to use the lavatory, and there's only one for like 200 people. That was one of the great comebacks of all times. But I remember walking in those. I've never been, and I've been in some old cellars. I've never been in cellars more caked with mold. I mean, it was 2 inches, 3 inches deep.
Yeah, this is it was 100-year-old, 200-year-old wine cellar, and clearly during the how many 50 years that that Hungary was under the Soviets, there wasn't a lot of maintenance going on.
Right.
So,
well, the Russian, as I recall, didn't the Nazis or the Russian czars or something really just sort of plundered the country of all its sweet wines when it.
Oh yeah.
World War II, and so they had to rebuild the entire industry. They were making just Plant to feed.
Yeah, and now they have done that, and not only that, but the basic grape from there is called Ferment, and they're now doing some really lovely dry white wines from the same grapes that they make the sweet wine, and it's all coming from a village called Mad, M-A-D, and the wine is delicious. I mean, it's really great, and a lot of the Tokai producers, because of all the categories of wine that there are, sweet wine is lagging the rest of the, champagne, sparkling wine, all of that stuff is selling lots, but sweet wine, dessert wine is definitely lagging. Yeah. So they're, instead of making dessert wine out of all the ferment that they pick, they're now making a dry white wine, which is delicious and not expensive.
Greg Becker suggests the Alsace wine route in a particular village called Riquer. You speak French, Andy. I don't. Riquer.
Riquer.
Oh, okay.
It's not French, it's German actually, but Alsace is kind of overlooked by a lot of people. It's French wine, by the way, and they make some absolutely beautiful white wines.
And they're happy to see people? They're happy to see visitors?
Yeah, absolutely. Were you with me on? I've been there several times now, and it was. I went there once in December for the Christmas markets there. They were just absolutely fantastic, and they make that Munster cheese, the really good smelly stuff, and the wine is. Everybody's very, very happy to see you if you kind of be walking through Riquer or any of those beautiful little villages there. It's a spectacular place.
Okay, we left anybody out for easy access for visitors for wine? I feel like we're missing something, but I can't think about it. Canada's happy. I mean, north of Niagara Falls is a nice great
Okanagan area. Right. I think so. I've never been there, but I've tasted the wines, and the wines are excellent.
Yeah, I've been there and I've liked the wines, and they are happy to receive visitors as well.
I'll tell you where else. Right here in the good old U.S. of A., a lot of people overlook the Central Coast and the Paso Robles area, and this is right now the hottest production area in the United States.
Really? Really?
Yeah, along with Santa Barbara and the Santa Ynez area, but specifically Paso Robles on the what is it, the west side of the town of Paso Robles. You just go up this one road, and there are all these wonderful wineries, and they all welcome visitors.
I'd like to throw Croatia in. They have some small wineries that are easier to visit. And Linda asks about Australia, and I've never done a wine tour of Australia.
Oh boy, I have, and I would say that the Hunter Valley, which is north of Sydney, and maybe about an hour, 20 minutes north of Sydney, is good because there are a lot of wineries lined up. But and the Barossa which is a little bit harder to get to, which is north of Adelaide, is spectacular. And the Adelaide Hills, if you go to Adelaide, it's not very far. It's like 40 minutes north of Adelaide. There are a lot of wonderful wineries there. And my good buddy Michael Hillsmith has a winery there. And if you really want to venture, go out to Perth, which is all the way on the western coast of Australia. It's a long flight, but if you happen to be in the neighborhood, south of Perth, there are beautiful wineries all the way down. There's beautiful beaches and there's great wineries.
Well, I think we about covered the world. I hope we can all get there sooner rather than later. Thank you so much, Andy. Nice talking to you. Andy's website is bluelifestyle.com. There you will find all kinds of advice about.
And by the way, my first name is not Andrew; it's Anthony.
Anthony, yes,
Anthony. It's got Andrew on the screen.
Penalty points will be assessed. Anthony's website is bluelifestyle.com, and you can find out. Do you have all your wine ratings on there too, Andy?
All the wine ratings, all the spirits ratings, and in travel input from Rudy Maxa.
Sometimes you put my news up there. I appreciate it. Andy, thank you for joining us. Anthony Dias Blue.
My pleasure.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
And we have on the coming into the second half our guest, Patrick Smith. I told you he was coming up. Patrick Smith is a pilot for a major U.S. airline whose name he would prefer we not discuss, but it's a big airline here in the United States. He flies 767s, and I think you're on a bit of a hiatus now, aren't you, Patrick?
Yeah, I guess you could call it that. That's one way to describe it. Essentially, I'm being paid to stay home for the most part right now, which is a lot less enjoyable than it might sound to some due to the levels of stress and anxiety that myself and others in my situation are going through right now.
Well, we're lucky to have you here today. Patrick writes a great blog called It's at askthepilot.com. And one of the unique things about Patrick is he is able to explain a whole lot of things about commercial aviation and airplanes and flying and what happens and what the politics are and so on in great, clear language that anyone can understand. He also has a book called Cockpit Confidential that answers a lot of questions and is a great read. Okay, Patrick. First of all, you were talking about you. Let's get that I don't want to get out of the way, but let's deal with it first. I know airlines have to keep everybody on their payroll until the end of September as part of their receiving billions from Uncle Sam. But airlines seem to be suggesting they're going to be a lot slimmer staff-wise come October 1st. Does that include, are some pilots also going to be losing their jobs?
Yeah, I think that's all but a certainty at this point, barring an almost miraculous recovery between now and September, which I personally don't see coming. But overarching all of this, we have to make the point that it's early in the game and we don't know how this is going to shake out. I mean, so much of it depends on the trajectory of the recovery, how long it takes, how quickly people get back flying, what the flying environment is going to be like. Are we going to create this post-COVID ordeal for passengers the way we sort of did after 9/11 that is going to risk driving customers away? How many? There are just so many unknowns right now. We have things happening globally at different speeds in different places across different cultures and different air travel market environments, and how it all shakes out. My guess is as good as anyone's at this point. Are we going to see airlines disappearing? Are we going to see mergers and consolidation? Will we see bankruptcies, liquidations, employees being laid off? Probably a little bit of all of those things.
How does an airline decide which pilots to let go?
Well, with pilots and flight attendants too, everything comes down to the seniority system. So an airline will have a system-wide displacement bid, as we call it, based on how many pilot slots are needed in which aircraft for the foreseeable future, and everybody puts in their preferences, and a certain number of pilots, because the airlines will be getting smaller, will basically drop off the bottom and have nowhere to go, and those are most likely the pilots to be laid off. I was laid off for more than 5 years after 9/11.
And it just seems like a year or two ago, the newspapers were filled with articles about the shortage of pilots in America.
Yeah, I mean, isn't that funny? This is one way to take care of the pilot shortage. Right. It's temporary, but that can mean different things. As of right now, the pilot shortage does not exist in any way, shape, or form. How long that remains the case, it all gets back to what I was saying. It just depends on how long the recovery takes and what form it takes.
What are you writing about these days?
Good question. If you go to Ask the Pilot, my more recent entries have been, I don't know how to describe it exactly, but maybe a little bit more personal in nature, as far as how I'm personally dealing with the uncertainty right now and what my feelings about it are, how I'm bracing myself possibly for the worst, and having been through this before, how that plays into it. And
what did you do those 5 years after 9/11? How did you put food on the table for 5 years?
Well, I improvised. It was about 5.5 years that I was laid off start to finish, and I didn't fly. I didn't touch the controls of an airplane for that entire span. What I did instead is started writing and blogging and began the whole Ask the Pilot enterprise, which began as a regular column on the old website salon.com, which still exists, and from there it grew into at least 2 books, and started this whole second career, I guess, of mine. I don't know if that's being an entrepreneur exactly, because it didn't make me rich by any stretch, put it that way, but it did keep me sane during that period when I was grounded, and it also kept me from having to go out and fly some really crappy aviation job. I mean, making 20 grand again at a regional carrier, having to go do that. I'd already done that. I didn't want to have to go and take that step back again, so I just created something on my own, and it, like I said, it didn't make me rich, but it did open a whole new avenue for me as far as the writing and blogging, which that was 20 years ago, and I'm still doing it.
Do you? I know this is a question that people ask everybody, each other, all the time, let alone a pilot. Do you expect people are going to rush back to flying as soon as they can, or take a slow build again before people feel comfortable?
I have a feeling it'll be somewhere in between those two things, and a lot of it depends on on the trends of the virus. If it comes back again in this second wave that people are projecting, or if it just if people just develop a sort of virus fatigue and we just push through this. I don't know. It could go either way. Different things can happen. There's just too much in play right now to know. I'd like to add something to what we were just talking about, pilots being furloughed. The pilots at the bottom, as the airline shrinks, lose their job and are then eventually recalled in reverse seniority order. The last pilot hired is the first pilot furloughed, and the last pilot called back, if you follow the logic of that. It's
right.
All seniority based. And an important point here, and this is something a lot of people don't realize, when you're a pilot and you lose your job for whatever reason, furlough, bankruptcy, whatever, you don't just slide over laterally to another airline and pick up where you left off in terms of your salary. you lose everything and you begin again at the bottom of the seniority list at whatever carrier you go to, assuming any are hiring, which in this case they're not going to be. But,
that seems weird because it seems like experience counts.
But it doesn't. Let's say you're a 30-year captain at a major carrier. Your airline goes out of business. This airline over here is hiring. You go to that airline. Well, guess what? You begin again as a probationary employee, making probationary pay. Your experience in that circumstance means nothing. And there are no exceptions to that. That's the way, that's the architecture of the airline seniority system-wide. At least in the U.S., it does vary a little bit at some airlines overseas and other countries, but here in the U.S., that it's very regimented, very rigid. That is how it works. Whether you're Captain Sully, if he had gone to a different airline, and it doesn't matter. You begin again, and you lose all of your pay, all of your benefits, everything you had, and you start again, and you work your way up the seniority ladder the way you did the first time. And that's why pilots tend to be so protective of their jobs and tend to worry so much when things like this happen, because I've got 20 years at my carrier, and if I had to go and begin again somewhere, all of that flushes out, and I start over.
I'm just very surprised that I'm surprised I don't know why the pilots unions haven't done.
Well, interestingly, it was the unions themselves that built this system, and maybe back in the day, whenever the proverbial day was exactly, the system worked. But the way things happen now, I'm not a big. I'm a fan of certain aspects of the seniority system, but not the system in whole, especially when transferring from carrier to carrier.
Right. Okay. What else are you writing about? Tell me, I know you have a million ideas all the time. Patrick's been a frequent guest on that weekend radio show, and it's such a luxury for me to have more than 6 or 7 minutes to talk to him. So.
Well, I don't know. Let's see what's on my website right now. Offhand, I couldn't even tell you. I did a Q&A about what did I call it? Questions and answers, coronavirus edition. Somebody had asked me how, with nobody flying right now, or very few people flying, airplanes tend to be very lightweight because we're not carrying a lot of people. How does that affect the handling of a jet? So I get into technical discussions like that, but most of what I write about is just more industry related, airline culture, airline trends, safety and security, that kind of thing. I don't focus too much on the hands-on technological gee whiz of flying, but it does come up, and it's fun to write about sometimes.
Well, is it different flying a lighter plane than a heavy plane?
It is and it isn't, and the way I answered that was first to point out that just because there are fewer planes flying right now, that doesn't mean there aren't any people on them. Routes are being consolidated. So right. I flew New York to LA and back last weekend, the first flight I'd done in a long time. And, we had about 100 people on the plane each direction. So it was about half full for a 767.
How many were wearing masks? How many had masks?
Everybody, 100%.
And were people really quiet? I guess you don't talk a lot when you have a mask on to your neighbors.
Well, I can't say that everybody left their mask on for the entire flight.
Sure.
But people seem to be in pretty good spirits, all things considered. And,
we have a question from Randy relative to what we were talking about just a moment ago. He asked if you drop from being a 767, or not drop, but if you change from being a 767 pilot to a 737, a smaller plane, you get paid less?
Yes.
So the type of aircraft
you absolutely get paid less. The pay scales vary airline to airline, but they tend to be aircraft based. Bigger planes pay higher.
Okay.
So because of downsizing, you get bounced out of your seat to a smaller plane, you're going to take a pay cut along with that.
So the head of Boeing this week drew some ire from airline executives when he gave a quote that he thought that there was going to be probably a merger of major carriers in the United States possibly as a result of this money losing period. I can't imagine it, but I'm no expert. Do you have a thought on that?
Well, I don't doubt that some form of industry consolidation is in the works. Whether it's two major carriers merging together, that's a little different. When you look at it
More
right
like
now,
maybe or something.
Yeah, I mean, right now we basically have the big three. You have Delta, United, American. Let's excuse Southwest for a minute from the picture because they're a domestic airline almost exclusively. But for two of those three to merge, now you create this absolutely enormous airline that puts the third man out, so to speak, at a pretty significant disadvantage. Could that happen? I don't know. I think what you're more likely to see is one of the big three merging with, say, Hawaiian or Alaska Airlines, possibly JetBlue, one of the kind of second tier majors being absorbed into one of the big three. Maybe two or three different sets of those consolidations going on. We don't know.
Narendra has a question. Did I cut us off? No, it's okay. She asks if it's hard for a U.S. pilot with an overseas airline.
I'm sorry, you cut out, Rudy. Could you repeat that?
One of our viewers asked if it's difficult to get a job with an overseas airline.
Well, it depends which overseas airline you're talking about. A lot of foreign carriers will only hire nationals from their countries. Look at the example of the Gulf carriers, Emirates and Qatar Airways, for example. They hire almost exclusively from wherever. People from all over the world work at the Gulf carriers. Emirates is an interesting example. They have more South African pilots at Emirates than pilots from any other country, because South Africa has a very proud and long aviation tradition. A lot of people get into flying or into aviation, become pilots, but there are very few jobs in that country. And a lot of those pilots have ended up at Emirates and some at Qatar and so on. That's a little different than British Airways or Lufthansa, which tend to hire people from those countries. Some of the Asian airlines in China and elsewhere will hire foreigners on contracts to work for a period of years. There's a lot of that. So it depends where in the world you're talking about.
Well, I can't think offhand of anywhere in the world right now where airlines are doing so well they need more pilots.
They're not. That's a rhetorical question at this point because doesn't exist for the moment.
Right. So Mark Wexler is an interesting friend of mine. He just signed on or just asked a question. He did the only documentary on Air Force One where he's allowed to shoot for National Geographic. He did a documentary on Air Force One and has a keen interest in aviation. And he's also a germaphobe. Sorry, Mark. But it addresses his question. He says, do you worry about picking up the virus while flying? Does the cockpit have a separate air system from the rest of the plane?
It doesn't and doesn't. Mostly no. Do I worry about that? No. I mean, honestly, Rudy, the worry of getting coronavirus is, somewhere at the bottom of my list of concerns right now. What I'm primarily worried about is the future of my career and the company I work for and the future of air travel and how this all affects that. I mean, that's what stresses me out. That's what keeps me awake at night now, not contracting COVID, which I don't want to downplay it, but it's not, a significant concern for somebody in my age group.
I've never flown we have run into each other in an airport, but I've never flown in a flight you've been flying. Are you the kind of pilot who at the end of the flight opens up the cockpit door and stands there and says goodbye to everybody?
Is there a type of pilot who does that? I'm not sure. But yeah, of course I do. Know. Sure. Not every time. I may, be busy with something, crying or picking up all the pieces that broke off after my landing. But no, yeah, I sure I do that. It's always fun to watch the people go by and acknowledge the flight attendants, but not you. I don't know, or maybe that just happens to me. But
That's very, very funny. Well, I presume you have some paperwork to do after you land, and I guess those pilots are willing to put that off for a few minutes. And I was just thinking in terms of getting ill, it might not be the best time to stand right up there and shake everybody's hand as they get off the plane. That's all.
Yeah, I suppose on some level the risk goes up by standing in that particular spot for that length of time. But again, that's not something that's really on my radar as far as worries.
Yeah, I'm sure you've read what I've read about the intensifying effort to clean planes between flights. I've never really read airlines telling me anything about how they clean flights. Is this a major escalation from routine everyday maintenance or every night maintenance?
I think it will be, and I think it has to be for people's safety, and also because it makes them more comfortable and more likely to come back. Right. So for those two reasons, I don't see airlines having any way out of that. For what it's worth, the plane I flew to LA in last weekend was the cleanest airplane I've seen maybe ever in my career. I mean, it was immaculate. It was immaculate inside and out. Even the cockpit was clean, and that's saying a lot. A lot of people don't realize jetliner cockpits are disgusting. I mean, just dust and grime and fingernails and sesame seeds. And I mean, they're pretty gross. And this one, you almost could have eaten off the floor. And I think you are going to see that. I mean, we're going to see a lot of changes. The question is, how temporary are they going to be? Here it is, two decades after 9/11, and we're still doing the shoes and the liquids when we go through TSA, and nobody can really explain why. A part of me wonders, 20 years from now, are we still going to be wearing masks and having our temperatures checked just because we got used to it? I hope not. And there's a fine line here for airlines. They want their customers to feel safe and they want them to be safe, but they also don't want to drive them crazy or drive them away. One of the things I noticed last weekend, and I wrote about this on my site, was the number of public address announcements, which at airports in the U.S. is already out of control, is now on another level of obnoxiousness. I mean, there was PA after PA after PA about social distancing and touching this and cleanliness and CDC guidelines and masks, and it was a little overwhelming. And for people not sure if they want to get back into the flying thing and they're exposed to that, I mean, it was intimidating, maybe a little scary for some people to be subjected to that so relentlessly. I hope that some of that will back off and become more reasonable.
Well, I think, terrorists are forever. Pandemics are, we hope, only an occasional thing. So I hope we won't be wearing masks, and a couple of years from now, I hope there is something that protects us from this particular virus, and another one doesn't come along. From Sonoma comes a question about middle seats. I know JetBlue yesterday, I believe, announced that until through the July 4th holidays, they will guarantee you that the middle seat will be empty unless you're traveling with your family. I know some airlines are sort of saying, well, we're going to try. What was your experience on that LA flight? Were middle seats blocked out, or
all middle seats were blocked out? And I have a feeling airlines are going to be following each other with that policy, at least for a while. Otherwise, people just aren't going to fly because they don't want to be in a middle seat. That's what the survey said, but people are going to say that anyway, because who wants to be in a middle seat ever?
Yeah, and they got to get from here to Los Angeles or whatever, and I mean, airlines obviously cannot make any money with empty middle seats. That's taking out a lot.
Well, that's an important factor here as far as how long this lasts, and if you have to block all your middle seats, to ballpark for a big airline, that's a quarter of your revenue, and how do you compensate for that? Well, prices are going to have to go up. I mean, flying is cheap. It's been really cheap for a long time, but people have gotten used to that. And so prices start going up 25, 30% across the board. You're recouping money, but you're also driving people away at that point. And where's the balance with that? We don't know yet. We don't know how long the middle seat thing is going to be an issue for people, how long airlines are going to have those seats blocked, and on
really
and on.
Expensive snack packs. Gene from California asks, what do you do with a passenger who starts sneezing and coughing in flight? Now, I know it's not your problem, it's the flight attendant's problem, but if they figured out how to deal with that, I guess you're sitting next to them, you ask to be moved. It'd be my off the cuff.
Yeah, and right now there's usually plenty of empty seats where somebody can be moved to. I mean, and obviously people sneeze and cough for different reasons. I was sneezing all morning because of seasonal allergies, but you know, that's an aspect of this too. People being spun up and prone to panic and overreaction. Now we saw that after 9/11, where planes were diverting and all these crazy things were happening because somebody stood up or gave somebody the wrong look. You know, we have to be careful there with this as well, not to overreact and panic every time somebody, you know, coughs or sneezes within 20 feet of somebody else.
And in fairness, I think from what I haven't heard sneezing being one of the indicators of the coronavirus. Coughing, yes, but I think I'm a serial sneezer. I mean, I don't sneeze a lot, but when I sneeze, I have to sneeze like 10 times, and I can't stop.
I was sitting at the gate the other day in New York, and I had to sneeze, and I kind of forced myself out of it because I was so afraid that if I sneezed, everybody was going to get up and run through the hallways.
That guy, right? What do you talk to a lot of other pilots now that you're on sort of a hiatus? I mean, do you guys have your own blogs that you all, or your own chat rooms that you get into and talk about?
Yeah, I started a chat group with me and then 4 or 5 of my colleagues, the pilot friends, and that's
surprising coming out of there. Anything surprising coming out of there?
I tend to be the most pessimistic of the bunch right now, and it's a reasonable cross section of pilots from different carriers at different levels of seniority, and I seem to be the pessimistic one, and then they all seem to be thinking that recovery will be sooner rather than later, and you know, we're all going to hold on to our jobs, and then, you know, I want to believe that. My nature is to be a little more cynical and pessimistic, but we'll see. The airline bailout, you know, will protect our salaries at least until September 1st or September 30th. After that, we don't know. And something there too, a lot of people hear airline bailout and then give you a dirty look. You know, what the money that the airlines were given was for was primarily just to cover salaries, to keep people from being laid off right away. There are going to be layoffs later on. And in the meantime, airlines are still losing money. The money they got was not to cover their operational costs. They're still losing millions and millions of dollars a day.
I think United's losing like 40 million a day. I think Delta's losing like 30 million a day. I mean, the numbers are so incredible. This could be our last question here. Last question for Patrick Smith of AskThePilot.com and his book, Cockpit Confidential. I know that there's a reduction in food services, at least in coach class. Are they serving meals in business class? Did you notice?
On the transcontinental flight that I flew last weekend, there was no meal service in business class or in the back. But that will vary airline to airline, and there is some service on international routes. And all of this, Rudy, is subject to change literally day to day. Any day. So, you know, don't go by anything I said just then as far as your planning purposes, because it'll be changing.
Does your airline keep you up to date on stuff?
They're very good as far as communicating and keeping us advised of numbers and the data of passengers returning and you know, what we could or should expect in the future. But that said, they admit, and it's plain to see that this still could go a number of different ways between now and the end of the summer.
Patrick Smith, I really appreciate your taking time out of your day, although as you point out, you got some time these days.
I don't have a hell of a lot to do.
Patrick Smith, go to AskThePilot.com and read his blog. I think you can find a way to pick up his book there. You can get it on Amazon, or it's in most airport shops still, called Cockpit Confidential. He's really brings a real interesting eye on commercial flying that I've learned a lot from, and I know most of our audience will. Patrick, thanks so much for joining us.
That's what the book looks like, if anybody's interested. Shameless plug time before I go. So
that's what we're here for, partly. Thank you, Patrick.
Thanks, Rudy.
Take care.
You too.
I think next week, by the way, I think we're going to have Jonathan Karl. He's the White House correspondent who has been has been attacked by President Trump from time to time for his questioning. I say maybe he's going to be on. He's going to try to, but depending if there's breaking news, we may have to have him on another time. But I want to talk to him about what it's like to cover a president on the road, which is to say flying with Air Force One, in Air Force One, or in a plane that's accompanying Air Force One, probably more often. So I hope you'll join us. Meanwhile, thanks for stopping in today. We'll do it again next Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Central, noon in California. Thanks so much for stopping by. I look forward to seeing you. And if you next time you sign up for one of these sessions, down at the bottom is a little thing saying you can sign up to be told each week who the guests are, and you can decide if it's a topic of your interest or not. Meanwhile, travel safely. I hope we can all travel one way or another soon. We'll see you next week.